Today I'm breaking down this Vegeta sketch and explaining the process behind how I approach the drawing. For this piece, uh, the main focus was structure, posture, and capturing Vegeta's personality through the pose and expression. Um, Vegeta is a character where confidence and attitude are extremely important, so a simpler standing pose to feel powerful. Or in other words, like a word for Vegeta could be like intense. The first thing I focused on was overall body construction and stance. I felt like I could have done a better job with that. I was using a reference, and I feel like there were specific things. I think the way that his armor was facing, I could have rotated it a little bit. The fact that the thing is, it was facing more forward, not squarely forward in the reference, while his body is kind of, slanted to the side. Like his body is facing like to the side a little bit. So I could have rotated the armor a little bit and made it a bit more three dimensional as it's rotating to make it look better. I think that's something I could have cleaned up quite a bit more when it comes to overall body construction. And so the construction of the body was correct, but like getting the armor to even be in the proper perspective with the way his body was facing, um, I could have done that as well. Or I could have aligned the armor with the stance. I could maybe word it like that. I tried to keep the pose compact and controlled because that fits Vegeta's personality much better than exaggerated loose movement. Um, which is true. He so his body structure is more slim. He's more like he's like slim and intense. That's how I could kind of like explain or define like his body structure. He has like his obviously most men would, maybe not all, but most of them, their natural shoulders might be a bit broader than their hips or waist, right? Um, if they have like let's say for example, if every man had a low body fat percentage, they'd have more broader shoulders to even to a very slight extent. That's maybe more natural for them, right? So Vegeta has that, but his entire body is very slim. But if you look at pretty much almost most other characters in the series who are, like for example, the Z fighters, they have broad shoulders, but also a broader body in general. Krillin, he's more, his body's balanced. Master Roshi, his body's more like balanced, but he's also older. But if he gets into the buff form, broader shoulders, whatever. But what happens is, yeah, like just making sure that the um overall body structure or construction, I should say, is proper. I okay, my fault. So I was talking about, I tried to keep the pose compact and controlled because that fits Vegeta's personality much better than exaggerated loose movement. So basically, this was a movement pose. All right. Um, when he's in movement pose, it's usually combat. He doesn't he doesn't really have a lot of stances from what I've noticed. Like Goku has like a lot of stances. He's more of like he's just standing. Maybe he has like one stance before he gets ready to fight, and then he has like action poses. So that's pretty correct. Um, all right. The first thing I focused on was overall. Okay, I already read that. After this, and also one reason why I keep reading things over and over again is so I have it laid out what I'm gonna say, and then what happens is I segue off of that and branch off into different ideas based on what I'm saying, and then I lose my place. Looking at this entire page of writing. All right. So after establishing the basic structure, I started refining the torso and shoulder placement. So torso and shoulder placement, that's what I was talking about with the armor and the way it was facing. On top of that, one important area in the drawing was the Saiyan armor construction. I paid close attention to how the armor wraps around the chest and connects to the shoulders and abdomen. So I tried to get it as correct as possible. While I was getting it correct, I didn't get the rotation exactly how I would have liked it, as I kept explaining. I think that was the main thing with this. Thinking about the armor in three-dimensional forms of flat, instead of flat shapes helps the drawing feel much more solid. Um, yeah, like for example, the way it wraps around his like his rib cage, and how. So, for example, when you look at metal plated armor or armor in general, what happens is it's not like a one piece thing, or there's sections to it, because like if you take something that's metal and it's armor, so it has to be able to bend and be pliable and move aligned with the way a character is moving while not restricting their movement unless it weighs something. But like, so there, there's, for example, if you look at like a knight who wears armor, like there's armor slabs protecting bigger areas, and then there's chainmail, I think that's what it's called, that's is literally linked, metal linked together very tightly, but is loose enough that they put the chainmail at like the elbow or the wrist or like the shoulder so that there's mobility there. But what happens is, like, yeah, like the armor plates sit flat, and then there has to be areas for movement. Vegeta's armor, there's like a chest plate, there's the ab plate, and then there's side plates, and then there's something in the back. So it's like a bulletproof vest in a way, or that's like kind of the way kind of structure it looks like. And then there's like straps. The straps kind of act like chainmail, I guess, right? Holding it together. So I tried to make sure that, like, at least, so it was really more like the chest area and like the ab area that I felt like I could have rotated more. Maybe that's just me being too much in my head. But I tried to make sure the rest of it was like resting on the body the way it should, based on how the body was how the body's composition is. I paid close attention to how the armor wraps around okay, I already said that. Thinking about the armor as three-dimensional forms instead of flat shapes, I did say that, helps the drawing feel much more solid. Another major focus was the facial structure and expression. I feel like I got that more correct than even past Vegeta sketches I've done. This one looked, the face looked more accurate. I would say in comparison to, and I have not drawn Vegeta in a very long time, so I should expect that if I'm trying to improve, next time I draw Vegeta years later, that should be better. Hopefully, Vegeta's eyes, Vegeta's eyes, brow shape, and mouth placement are all very recognizable, so small mistakes can quickly change the likeness of the character. Same thing I was saying about Goku or other iconic characters when or in the recent video I was talking about Killua. Trying to make sure those very distinct things are correct so that the character looks accurate, if that's my goal. I tried to keep the expression sharp and intense while still staying clean and readable. As I refine the anatomy, I also focus on improving the shoulder to arm connections and overall muscle flow. That's something that helps with anime characters, excuse me, that's something that helps anime characters feel more believable and less disconnected structurally. The forms and gloves were another area I worked on because so cylindrical forms help give the arms more depth and dimension. For the line work, I focus on cleaner, more intentional strokes instead of heavy sketching in every area. Cleaner lines usually make the drawing feel more confident and polished overall. You're also practicing better accuracy when you do that as well, by giving yourself less chances to get it correct. Not that you have to be perfect, but it's a good way to practice, obviously. Another thing, another important thing I paid attention to was silhouette readability. Um, Even from a distance, the character should immediately read as Vegeta through the hair, shape, posture, and armor design alone. This sketch also helped practice balancing stylized anime anatomy with more believable structure underneath. Um, Over time, the that balance is what really helps anime drawings start feeling more professional and dimensional. Yep, you're you're consciously trying to do things, but because you're doing these practices properly, where you're trying to make sense out of like how the character is supposed to look and building it from the uh, beginning structures outwards and making sure it's all in proportion and making sure it's all in perspective properly. Um, you're also mental. You're building out mental maps of how these characters look properly, or how if you're gonna draw a character with a specific type of anatomy, you're getting better at it from a level where you're, like I'd say in much more prior videos, you're subconsciously getting better at mapping this stuff out so that it's taking you less effort to draw it professionally or draw it the way that you would want to draw it when you're trying to draw it in those specific ways, because you're, like I said, you're consciously trying to make sure it's accurate, or consciously trying to do you're as you're on purpose trying to do something as you're literally doing sitting there and drawing it, but you're building up a muscle memory and mental understanding to actually do it properly without even trying as well, because you're practicing the anatomy properly and practicing the perspective and the proportions and all this stuff properly until you're better able at creating that character without even trying, on top of the fact that you're trying to do it, so it just all comes out better. um Even from, it's to the point where you bring your pen to the paper and on accident you're doing things correctly, even if you were to not try as hard as you could. You start accidentally doing things correctly. That's what I mean by that. That's why it's so important to try and practice properly and try to understand how these things work, because you're it's to the point where you're not even having to try to get better. You're getting better automatically, and then you're also trying. So you know it's cool to see that you can grow at things to the point where it doesn't even require effort out of you. Or I should say, it's not requiring effort out of you to see a certain level of results, and that keeps building by itself as well. So, and that's because you've built up in practice to the point where you can do that. So even from the distance, the character should immediately read as Vegeta through the hair shape, posture, and armor design. I might have already read that. The sketch also helped this sketch also helped practice balancing stylized anime anatomy with more believable structure underneath. Over time, that balance is what really helps anime drawings start to feel more professional and dimensional. Overall, this piece was mainly about improving anatomy flow armor construction, pose balance, and overall lost my spot. Overall character presence while keeping Vegeta recognizable and true to the Dragon Ball style or Dragon Ball Z style. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more anime drawing tutorials and sketch studies, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.